So today we're going to be running through the installation and setup of a QNAP TS-251 Plus device. So this is a 2-bay NAS drive. We're going to be installing the disks into the trays and populating that into the unit, and we're also going to be upgrading the memory from this 2 gig unit. We're going to be upgrading that to 8 gig, and the reason for that is because we're going to be using it to do domain administration on a Windows network. So without further ado, let's go through and have a look at the disks that we've chosen and why we've chosen them. So it's always based on requirements. So at the moment the customer is using a Windows server. Now that Windows server has only got 2 1 gig disks in there, so we don't need to go crazy and sell them storage that potentially they're never going to use. So we've gone for 2 4 gig disks, and the reason for that is the unit itself is going to use not too much, around about 100 gig is what we normally give the system partition or the system volume, and the rest of it is going to be carved up between user files, so that is space for the user data, and also we're going to be using another shared folder of around about 2 terabytes, so it gives them enough to migrate all of the current data into, and also gives them growth for the future. So what we've got here is 2 WD Red Pro disks. So these are slightly more expensive than the WD Red, and the reason that we've gone for these is these have a spin speed of 7200 RPM, so they're going to be faster in terms of reading and writing than the standard WD Red disks, which I think are 5900 RPM. You can get other NAS drives that are 5400 RPM. These ones, or when we install NAS drives for people, we always go for the 7200 spin speed, which gives you better performance. So let's go ahead and open up the NAS enclosure. So we'll put these to one side for now. They're very well packaged in terms of making sure that no moisture gets in them, and they come well packaged in the box that was also packaged well. So inside here we've got the device itself, so we've got our power cable, we've got our external power adapter in here. So it comes with an external power brick, which we quite like, the fact that you can, if one of those goes pop, you can easily get a replacement. We get the screws for mounting the disks into the trays, and we get 2 network cables because it's got 2 network ports on 2 1 gig ports. We also get a remote control, which none of our customers are using. They're only using it for file sharing, so we don't actually require those or require that. Pop that back. And then the unit itself, very, very light and really well packaged. Obviously you don't want any damage to the unit. Okay, so the memory hasn't arrived, so what we're only going to be doing today is we're going to be adding the disks into the trays and showing you how to do that. Remove the unit, and then we have the unit. We'll take off the protective peely strip. So to change the memory, or to undo, basically take the 2 gig of memory that's in here. It's got 2 slots in here. So to take that out, you undo the top screw, the bottom screw, and this whole side panel slides off. And from there, you need to take the cage out that's inside that we mount the drives into. So let's go ahead and remove the drive trays. So being only 2 bays, the RAID configuration that we use RAID 1, so that's writing your data onto one disk and then mirroring the data onto the other disk. So we want our screws. You always get plenty of screws in here. So we've got a pack of silver screws, and we've got a pack of got 4 black screws. We don't actually use the 4 black screws. So we're going to use the silver screws, and we're going to mount the discs properly in there using all 4 of the screws. Okay, so that's the first one. Once we've mounted the drive into the tray, we actually write a label and attach it to the disc. That way we know which disc is which if we ever remove them from the unit itself, so for data recovery and things like that. Open up the screws, put them all there. And you want to use a small Phillips screwdriver to secure the drive. So we're going to use 4 screws here rather than 6. And you want to put 2 at the back end of the unit and 2 at the front end of the unit. And you want to make sure that you don't drop the screws onto the circuit board here. We're just going to tighten that up with a slightly bigger screwdriver. So that's the first drive, so we can slot that in. Like that. And then we'll move on to the second drive. So you can mount SSD drives in here, 2.5-inch SSDs. Becomes a little bit more of an expensive solution when you're using SSDs for NAS storage, but the performance is, as you can imagine, much better in terms of read and write speeds. However, as this is just doing file sharing, we don't require that. But you can use the SSDs. They'll be really beneficial if you're using virtual desktop environments created using the QNAP virtual desktop environment, which is a loaded feature that you can download and install on the device itself, and then you can load in things like Windows virtual desktops. So that's it in terms of adding the disks into the unit. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to run through the initial setup. So we can run through all of the setup that we're going to do, and the reason that we can do that is it's got 2 gig of memory in, so that's sufficient to get us started, and then once the memory arrives we'll change that. So connecting up, what you want to do is you want to take your network cable that goes into the top network port like so, and we're going to just set it up for DHCP. We're not going to give it a fixed IP address at the moment. We usually do that once we arrive on customer site. And then add the power brick and power it up, and once it starts, it takes a little while to start, but once it starts it will appear on your network because your router would have given it a DHCP address. And then we're going to find it on our network and then connect to it and do the initial setup. So that's all plugged in. Power button is at the top here, so just a single press there and that will start it up. So while that's starting, we can now move over to our web-based portal for the device itself. So how do we find the QNAP NAS device on our network? So we're actually going to be using Angry IP scanner, which will do a sweep of the network. Might take a little while to appear in the list. Let's see what 119 is. Okay, 119. Okay, this is us then. So just go through your list and check on IP addresses that you're not familiar with. So as you can see there, I've just run through a few of them to find the correct one. So this is our NAS drive. It's running 4360895 build. It's our TS-251 Plus. So we're going to start the Smart Installation Guide. So I am going to give it a host name, but I'm not going to do that now. I am also going to give it a standard password. Like that. And we're going to set our time. Okay, so that's correct. Synchronize the time server automatically. I'm going to cut that down. You do the UK pool. I'm going to use DHCP address into the following OS features. So we're going to select just Windows and Mac, because I know they've not got any Linux or Unix devices. And then we're going to apply that. Okay, so there we are. So now we can move on to the NAS management. So type in your username and password that you gave it earlier. Accept the licenses and information. Okay, so we're not going to do the update just yet, but what we are going to do is we are going to create a system file system that we can load our apps into. So the first thing you want to do is you want to assign your storage pool. So to do that, we're going to use both disks like so. We're going to configure it in RAID 1, and we're not using a hot spare. So if you don't use a hot spare, then make sure that you do a secure offline backup, because if you do get a double drive failure, then you'll lose all of your information. So we're going to set our alert threshold to be 80% on the storage pool. We're going to accept the defaults and make it maximum size, and then we're going to create it. So this is just the storage pool with the 2 disks. Then we need to create the volumes in that storage pool and then assign the file systems. There's the beep from the NAS. And there it's created our storage pool. So now we've got our storage pool. It's given it a guaranteed snapshot space, which we don't want to be using, but we can sort that out later. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create our new volume, and we're going to have this as a thick volume, and it's going to be storage pool 1, and we're going to call this system, and we're going to set this to, we are going to set that to be, going to set that to 50 gigabytes, and threshold of 90, 8K bytes per inode, and no shared volume on the file system. We're going to say next, and then we're going to say finish. So this will now create the default folders of homes, public and system. Once that's done, we can then upgrade the firmware and we can start installing the relevant applications that we want to install. So some of the applications that we install the hybrid backup application, and that is pretty much it, to be honest, and we'll show you going through that later. So as you can see here, we've got system in brackets. So the first volume that we created, we called that system. So whatever volume you create first, no matter what name you give it, it's going to make that the system volume. So we've called it system so that we can determine that it is in fact the system volume and not just the name system that we've created. So that's now ready. That's created our thick volume. As you can see, it's used a fair bit. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we're going to close that down for now, and we're going to start getting things ready. So the first thing that we want to do is to upgrade the system. So I'm going to go into Control Panel, and then I'm going to go into More, and then Firmware Update, and we're going to load the latest version. So say OK and continue that. That will then download the firmware and upgrade the system. There we go. So we're back up and running now. So we can log in. Obviously it starts all the internal processes before starting everything else. So let's now go down, close this off. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the icons that I don't want. Just do a right click on them and say remove, like so, and we're going to keep the rest of it. Okay, so that's all that. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to now create the rest of our volumes. So we're going to go into storage and snapshots. I'm going to say no to this. So this is a data collection agreement. So the disk analysis will be sent to QNAP and then they will then sell that on to their business partners. So we always say no to that because we want to keep things private. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, I'm going to go into storage and snapshots. So our RAID sync is set to medium speed, so that's absolutely fine. So I'm just going to say cancel to that. And then the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to load up the applications that we use first of all. So I'm going to go into App Center. Don't display that next time. Okay, so malware remover is adding, QSync Central is adding. The next thing I want to go and find is my QNAP Cloud, because I use this to connect to devices from the internet. So I'm going to install that, and I'm going to also install HBS3 hybrid backup sync. So this is what I use to provide a remote offsite backup. So I'm going to install that. While that's installing, I'm going to configure my QNAP Cloud. So I'm going to open this up, and we're going to go into Get Started. Okay, so I'm going to put my details in here. And then we're going to register the device. Okay, and we're going to call this, we're going to give it a name. Say next. We're not going to use the router auto configuration, and we are going to publish some services. And we're going to set our access control to private, which means that it can't be found if anyone searches in myqnap cloud. That's important. And we're going to publish the services, but we're actually going to disable that for now. We're going to publish them later. So we're going to say next. This will then register the device with myqnap cloud. And we're going to finish, and then we're going to close this down. Next thing we want to do is we want to sort out our SSL certificate. So to do this, we're going to click on SSL certificate, and we're going to use a Let's Encrypt certificate. We're going to download and install that, and we're going to accept the default email address for that, and we're going to say automatically renew before it expires. Okay, next thing we're going to do is publish services. So the only services that I publish, and I make sure that they're private so they can't be found, is the Secure NAS Web. So the Secure NAS Web gives you the ability to log on remotely. So we're going to say I'm going to enable that, but I'm going to make it private. And then I'm going to give it a code, and then I'm going to apply that. This is I'll leave this blank basically because I'm using a secure code, so we're going to apply that. Okay, now we can go back to our overview. We can see that web connectivity is disabled, which is absolutely fine. That means inbound, which is what we want. And all we're doing is we're making an outbound connection to myqnap cloud, and then we access our device through myqnap cloud on the private services. So that's all there is to that. The next thing I'm going to do is to close that down. I'm going to go to myqnap cloud and make sure that I can see it. And there's our device that we've got set here, which is all correct. So now if I go into the device itself and we go into services, under published services we don't see any, but private services we see our desktop. So that means that I will be able to access this no matter where I am in the world. Okay, so let's close that down. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back to our storage and snapshots, and we're now going to create the other volumes that we want to use. Okay, so we come to storage and snapshots, and I'm now going to create my additional volumes. So I'm going to say new volume. We want to make it a thick volume, and how big we want to set it. So in this instance I'm going to set it to 1 terabyte to start with. We're going to say 8 bytes per inode, and we're going to give it a name. So this one we're going to call beacon data. I'm not going to put a space in it. And then under advanced settings I'm going to set my threshold to be 90%, and I'm going to create a shared folder on that volume, and that's all there is to that part. I'm going to say next, and then we're going to say finish. Don't need to see that. So we're not going to be creating snapshots on this because we use our remote offsite backup system. Once the data is pumped out from the local NAS to our remote offsite backup solution, we create the snapshots on that local backup remote backup solution. So we don't need to create them on the device itself. We can always go back through the snapshots and recover whatever data our clients need. So while that's formatting and creating, the next thing that we want to do is we're actually going to do some setup on our remote system where we create a user, and then we can set up the remote offsite backup solution, which I'm not going to go into in this video. This video was purely around getting the initial device setup completed. Once it's created this volume, all we need to do is take the device to site and copy the data from the Windows server into the relevant folder structure on the NAS drive, and then we will create the domain system on the device itself. So that will be another video where I just talk about how you go through and set up your domain administration on the QNAP device. So that's all there was to it. If you found the video useful, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Just like to say thanks for your continued support, and thanks for watching.